Well, Jeff, it's so great to connect with you again today. My last year of law school, I took your class, Myth, Law, and Practice. And I got this line from the syllabus. This course examines both collective myths, which capture relevant archetypal human tendencies, and the personal myths, along with the associated histories of individual lawyers. Now, when I went to law school, I never expected to take a class like that, but I have to say it was one of my favorites. So it's great to be able to connect with you again today.
That's great. We didn't change the class much, but we changed the title. So now it's psychological development, colon, myth, law, and practice. So
Okay.
it just was a little too weird to have law transcripts with myth, law, and practice.
Well, I have to say, as a kid, I was never one of those students that appreciated Greek mythology.
Yeah,
I just thought it was a complete waste of time.
yeah,
And taking your class, I just saw like, oh, okay. It just like removed the blinders. Like, there's a ton of wisdom here.
yeah.
I didn't appreciate it. So that's one takeaway of many that I have from your class. But anyway, um, as I was thinking about this podcast, and I'm trying to interview people who have impacted me and people who are interesting, and you are one of those people that has impacted me, and is certainly interesting because you teach a class like myth, law, and practice at a law school, and that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. um, as you think back on your career as an academic, your research, things you've learned, are there any lessons that you would most like to pass along to future generations?
Yeah, that's a big question. And one idea is go back to the class and what are some of the big insights, which I think are major insights for both social and personal, on both social and personal levels. So one is the in some sense the separation of people is an illusion because there's this huge influence, largely unconscious, that starts at birth between individuals. And as you and I are talking now, even though we're not even in the same place, we're talking by Zoom, there's like 10,000 unconscious signals going back and forth between us. All mammals have a limbic system that's unconscious and it's picking up all these signals. And we have big influence on each other, bigger than we think. And separation is a very useful illusion, especially in law. People have identities, right? But there's a lot more interconnectedness between people than we think. And it's in the course, I had the general theory of love, which describes that in a developmental, it's a book that describes that in a developmental sense, how critically important that human connection is for infants, but it's critically important for anyone. That's one thing. The second thing is that influence propagates itself into the future. Okay. So you and I are talking today. We're going to have an influence on each other. Maybe we'll leave with some kindness in our heart, kindness in our interaction, and kindness in our heart. And that's going to go forward even after we're dead. You're going to talk to people today later. I'm going to talk to them. We have our families, we have our classes, we have where we work. All that propagates forward indefinitely. And so that's another element. And the interesting thing about that element is that it doesn't have a name attached to it. It's the legacy of each human being that has no name attached to it. They're not going to know that it's Nate or Jeff. There's going to be some kindness that flows forward, or conversely, some kind of roughness, and that's not going to have our name attached to it. And one person, one of my extended colleagues, Irv Yalom, who's a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, he writes things like this, and he loves the movie Ikuru, which is a 1952 movie, 100% Rotten Tomatoes rating, which makes this point. It's about a Japanese man who develops cancer, and so he's thinking about how things go forward. And all I'll say is it goes forward in an unacknowledged way. I don't want to spoil the movie. Okay. So those are two big things. And those apply both personally and socially. So the small interactions you have every day have a big social influence, that you influence other people and it flows forward in time. And this sounds a little new agey, but it's straight neuroscience. It's straight science. That's why I signed the General Theory of Love, which is written by neuroscientists. So those are two big things. And then, we're having that in mind. It tends to make us a little more careful what we're doing during the day, how we interact with other people, because it has this effect. And, especially so with people we're close to, but also other people. Another big lesson that's in the class that mythologically or Jungian wise, it's the shadow, is the idea. There's this kind of unconscious part of ourselves. And since you took the course, I've added a big kind of scientific component to that, mostly like psychological studies and stuff. And one thing, and this is kind of obvious to in the current day, but at a drop of a hat, we can create an experiment and we can induce people to form groups, basically largely unconsciously, and attribute negative qualities to other groups. We can do, these are frightening experiments. And these are like completely normal subjects. These are not like political nuts that we're talking about. Okay, we're not talking about political extremists. We're just talking about normal people. We can, the studies go like this. Like we have a group. We'll claim that we're doing psychological tests, and we'll claim that there's a test result that says they have a certain negative trait. And then we have a experimental context in which we induce them not to think about that trait. Then we show them a movie of another group, and they attribute that trait to the group, that negative trait, to the other group, okay? Even though there's no ostensible reason for them to do that. There's all these experiments like that. And it's stunning, okay? How quickly like group identities can emerge amongst people. And we see it all the time. Like when I was doing my internship for being a psychotherapist, I did it in San Jose and Santa Clara. And I worked at a youth shelter, 12 to 18-year-olds who couldn't live at home. And one thing I had to deal with all the time is the Norteños and the Sudanos gangs. What distinguishes them? Is some major substantive thing like politics? No, Norteño is North San Jose and Sudano is South San Jose. But this is, there's a danger of violence. We're talking about kids that are like 14 years old based on this. It's like the Red Sox Yankees or the, I don't know what, it's like, it's just amazing how powerful and dangerous this is. And obviously in our own country right now, it's kind of obvious that we face a lot of dangers based on this. And that's another really important thing to keep in mind. And how can we deal with that? Well, the first place to deal with that is in ourselves. Is look at what are our group identifications? Is there some darkness of our own group that we're hiding? It almost always is true. It is comical on the political sphere, like the people, attack each other for the very same things that they're doing. And, it's and also on the international level, so that's three big things. The fourth thing that I'd put in that it was not in the course is the second law of thermodynamics. What does that say? Entropy, disorder in that always increases. And one thing we see about our own lives, our country, our school, is it doesn't last. It disintegrates. And ultimately, if James Hillman, who's a famous kind of neo-Jungian scholar, he said it's amazing that people have picked up the so-called scientific myth, the idea that the universe started in a big bang. It's going to end in the second law of thermodynamics. Everything is going to be completely, a little bit warm particles disorganized. But we don't have to go to that dark place. We can it's just acknowledging death of ourselves, death of our ideas, death of our hopes. All those deaths we're going to face. Our country is not going to last forever. We kind of feel like it will, but it won't. And it might even be that now we have the singularity book, which I think is a really important book. Maybe we won't last, right? Maybe we won't be. Maybe Homo sapiens it's over. Maybe it's over. Because, the singularity argument is a very powerful argument. The argument's very simple. The singularity point that he defines in his book is where we can take a human mind and encompass it in a $1,000 laptop. Okay. And what happens then? Well, we have the same human mind, but now it runs 1 million times faster. Okay. So what does that mean? That means 30 seconds. In 30 seconds of actual time, I can do a whole year. So I can get my PhD 2.5 minutes in anything. Well, it might take me 3.5 minutes in some subjects. Okay. But that's what we're talking about. So what happens then? Well, normal human beings are obsolete as far as economics and everything else goes. And then what happens? So, so that's something this is a little bit, this is not Chat GPT. Chat GPT is a really crude, large language model. But, that's sitting there. And, there's a significant chance that 50 or 100 years from now, it'll be over as far as an unenhanced human being having a useful economic role. So I don't know. So that's that. So there's an end to the human species too, and it's just it's a good thing to have in mind. Having that in mind helps us live our life better, helps us enjoy, helps us appreciate things better. It changes our value system, and to some extent it avoids getting into all these identity things where I see my country, it has good things, it has bad things. Maybe I'll try to fix some of the bad things, but I know it's not there's nothing, there's no existential struggle because everything is going to eventually fail. It's one way to put it, which creates a freedom to act as a moral person and as a human being.
So obviously we could go for hours and days and months like we did in your class. There's so many directions we could go. I did want to mention that the 13th episode I recorded is titled The Singularity.
Yeah.
And I did my dissertation on why I think we're prone to underestimate AI. And it's because of Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity. And it's basically, if anybody's read Ray Kurzweil's book, they read my dissertation, they're like, oh, he's a Kurzweilian. He's just talking about some of these, he's just applying it in terms of why we're going to underestimate AI. And so, yeah, he's at 2045 now. Who knows what date the singularity hits or if it does. But if things just progress on the path they're going, that book to me was just one of the most kind of mind blowing, like, oh, yeah, this is a real possibility that's out there potentially in our lifetime.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm going to go look at your, I'll find that lecture.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. So how did you get interested in this? What, not every law professor, very few law professors are interested. They're interested in maybe some of these things, but not to this level. So what is it about you, or when did you really start thinking about these things deeply?
Which things?
The 4 lessons you just talked about.
I think,
yeah, sorry.
I don't know. That's a difficult, I was always interested in psychology, even though I was a physics major in college. But I kind of wanted to be a psychiatrist. And back in those days, psychiatrists were psychotherapists. They didn't do as many drug kind of things. I was always interested in a lot of things. I was not a big, we had the psychedelic movement in the 1960s when I graduated from high school in 1970. There was all this idealism there. Now it's coming back to some degree. There's also a lot of, our generation saw a lot of the dangers, which are, I think, a little bit underemphasized. But use of psychedelics in therapy is becoming a big thing. And quite clearly some of it is successful. I see that now I'm going off on a little tangent.
That's okay.
Basically, I guess one story that I can tell you is, was Larry Kramer dean when you were there?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the story. So I was the chair of the Joint Degree Committee. So that's putting together degrees with law where you could do 2 different degrees. Mm-hmm. And we shortened the time. And so Stanford is a great university, but it's very bureaucratic. And to get these joint degrees approved, you had to go to these big meetings with, top administrators. And we were at one of those meetings, and Larry and I were there, and they were grilling us on what's going on. And I made the point that they said, why can't people just sign up when they first apply for both programs? And I said, well, it's because many people come to, say, law school, and then they discover that they have this other interest, and so then we can't do it that way. And then Larry put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, some people at 50 years old are still in that situation. There's in a lot of things. I guess that's what it is. And I've always read a lot of different things, and I don't know, but that just just kind of, and then that course just came together partly from I went to a therapy school that was, even though I have a science background, kind of a hard science approach, and my scholarship is that way. I went to a school that was very humanities, neo-Jungian. It all these, like, a lot of the myth things come from the things I learned in the school, and I love that. It was really fun. And, we all would like to have, this relates to singularity a little bit too. We'd all like to have N lifetimes that are simultaneous, where N is quite a large number. And we become even larger after we implemented some of our alternative, life paths. And, that's part of the thing about finitude, is that it can't do that. I only have one. We only have one life, and only one path. And so there's a certain sadness in that. And, the myth there is the classic myth from of the descent of spirit. The spirit is up in heaven, and it comes down, and it embodies, and the embodiment creates limitation. But in some of the myths, they send an angel down to remind you of who you are, this actual spirit that's now, now it's kind of demonstrating its inside limitations. And limitations, like in law school, we talked about this. There was a second class called Alchemy, Law and Practice. I don't know if we had it when you were there.
No, I don't think so.
Now it's called Career Development, Alchemy, Law and Practice. In that class, we looked at ideas of kind of development of your life and career. And so some of the ideas, like this one, which is, and it's for law students, they're third-year law students, and there's all these limitations. This is another big thing that happens to us throughout life. I have to decide to go to a certain city to practice. I have to rule out the other ones. I'm gradually getting more and more kind of limited. And in some sense, I'm making choices that are ruling out these other possibilities. And that's just part of living. And then everything gets, that we all know this, it becomes, who my friends are, what direction I go. It's all influenced by all these decisions, and I'm going down this path. In economics, in math, we would call this a filtration. A filtration is like a set of events, and it gets larger and larger, the different possible paths. It's a measure theory concept.
Did you ever get into Stoicism? Because part of what you were talking about in terms of, being aware of our own mortality, and, that reminded me of negative visualization and Stoicism. And so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, Stoicism is it's CBT on steroids, basically.
Interesting. I have never thought of that, but that you say that, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of, there's a lot of good stuff on, there's like Ron Holiday's book, The Obstacle's the Way.
Yeah.
That's a good popular book. And of course you can read the Marcus Aurelius and all the basic things.
Right.
It's a very powerful set of ideas. One that I think is really valuable today for Generation Z. This is okay, boomer. Okay, like I'm this is like kind of the kind of thing that, but Generation Z kind of like there's a kind of lack of security feeling, from what the description and from my experience, a lack of, it's kind of a tragedy. It's kind of like there's a lack of solidness, and there's a kind of fragility. And there's all these books that talk about this of different kinds. And Stoicism is like the response, is like if you want to go to something that addresses that directly, Stoicism does that. Stoicism is anti-fragility in some sense. Because why? Because it's saying, okay, yeah, all these things happen, including things like really bad things like discrimination. Are you going to stay in that? Even though it's a bad thing, you might fight against it on a social justice level, but on an individual level, are you going to be stuck in that? And the stoic thing would be, no, I'm not going to be stuck in that. I'm going to accept my circumstances and I'm going to move forward. And that's a really, really healthy psychological place to be. So in that sense, Stoicism has this, has this psychological meaning. At least to me, it does.
So this is a kind of infantile, probably, but the way I've thought about this is back when I was a kid, video games were high stakes because you'd play for a long time, but you only got 3 or 4 lives. And if you died, you died. And that was it. And now video games is just, as long as you put in the time, you'll pass the game, at least in the, on track platform games. But I was thinking of that in terms of life, like the worst thing we can imagine, assuming the best thing of life is, the love and connection we have to humans. Well, the worst thing then that can happen is losing that connection, and it will happen.
Yeah.
Basically take the worst thing you can possibly imagine, and it's going to happen to you at some point, or to those that you love. And so I love this idea of Stoicism is cognitive behavioral therapy on steroids because it helps you deal with that.
Yeah, it's because it's cognitive behavioral on steroids. The argument for that is that Stoicism emphasizes reality.
Yeah.
There's all these, there's a psychoanalyst that I studied under for some of my, I have all this training in different therapy techniques. And, there's this idea, okay, I've tried to go up against reality and I've lost every time. Wow. So I'd like to have my own idea be what the universe is, but it's not.
Yeah.
And Stoicism emphasizes that here's the reality of who I am. Here's the reality of my past. Can't do anything about it. I can accept it and then gain strength by standing in their acceptance and not being caught up with it. Not being caught up with being a victim of my past.
Yeah.
And then that's the thing that is most likely to help me in the future to live a full life. And a full life means, it's another place where, here's another big thing. And this happens in therapy. So people come into therapy and they have the idea, well, there's all these negative emotions like sadness, anger. Well, the reality is those are all important players. Like anger is what happens when something's not okay. Your limbic system produces energy. It's all just energy for you to do something about it. And if as long as it's not mixed up with anxiety, then you might do some impulsive thing. But as long as you get rid of the anxiety, the anger is a really important emotion. In fact, if you don't have anger, you are not functional at all. You have to live in an institution. You can't take care of yourself. Sadness is the same thing. And the opposite of depression, the opposite of being in a bad state is aliveness. But aliveness means you're going to have the full experience of life. And it's going to include sadness. It's going to include all kinds of things. And that's the best you can do. There's an argument that's the best you can do. And how does that relate to Stoicism? Stoicism is kind of cognitive, but it's kind of the same idea, is that like the best I can do is live fully alive life. And that's what I think people like Marcus Aurelius saying, that was their goal. I live a fully alive life. I have a certain role that I choose, and I play that role to the hilt, and that's it. And I experience all the feelings, and that's what happens.
Can I ask you one more question? Have you spent any time on Buddhism?
I did when I was young. I grew up I have a unusual background of, I grew up in a Unitarian church in the late 1960s.
I remember that from our discussions.
And, that had all this openness, and it had a lot of experimental mistakes that affected people's lives in the late 1960s. But I also did like transcendental meditation. I studied under Maharishi, although I chose not to be a teacher because I didn't like the movement. I didn't like, that's what they called it. I didn't like what it was like. But that was more Hinduism. But I read a lot of books mostly. I don't have a practicing. I do meditation, but I don't have a practicing Buddhist background. I've done a lot of different things on the religious front. And then when I was in training, when I went to therapy school, and yet in training you do all these therapies with other therapists. And one therapist said, the reason you're going to this school, this neo-Jungian school, is to figure out your spiritual beliefs. And I thought, yeah, it kind of hit me, yeah, there's all these things. How do we think about them? Yeah. So,
well, I read Jack Kornfield's The Wise Heart. I haven't spent a lot of time on Buddhism, but Jack Kornfield's book was just awesome to me, which actually reminds me, the person who introduced me to Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity, is also the one who introduced me to Jack Kornfield, The Wise Heart and Buddhism. It's my PhD advisor, Brian Bonner from the University of Utah. So anyway, well, I've taken more of your time than I asked for, and this has just been so fun for me to connect and hear these thoughts. And I look forward already to listening to this episode again. It's been fun for me to go back through some of the papers I wrote for your class, some of my reflection papers, and I want to learn more about your work. And you said your LinkedIn bio is maybe one of the best places for that.
yeah.
But your work is varied. I mean, this Myth and Law is just a very small part. We got a taste of some of your interests today, but I just want to say thank you. This has been so fun for me to connect, and just appreciate you spending some time.
I was very fortunate to have you as a student, and so I'm grateful that we were able to reconnect here.